Okay, so I'm going to give you a short update on what I'm involved in right now so that you understand what's going on and why I'm not making so many videos at this moment. I am quite busy with programming tasks related to the Bible, so I will let you know what I'm doing. Now, you know that we're creating a fresh translation of the Bible, not just the New Testament. That means that I had to make some choices early on about not only what text I'm going to use for the New Testament in Greek to translate from, which I decided on the Byzantine text by Robinson in Pierpont, because this was fresh work at establishing the majority manuscripts, which are Byzantine form. Now, you may not know what any of that means. That's okay. Maybe this is the first time you've heard these kinds of things. That's okay too. It's your first time hearing it. Just kind of take it in, absorb it. So I made those decisions on the Byzantine text because, well, first off, I was trained as an analyst in the military and linguist. And so I still take that as my foundation from when I was 17 years old when I entered the military. And I still use that as my foundation for many things that the Lord says, do this and do this and do this. Okay? When I look at this issue and I read these scholars who think they're so intelligent that they know the way in order to figure out what the original text was of the New Testament, for example, right? That's where a lot of the work is done. And I read the absolute insanity of circles and knots that they tie themselves in, and then they declare that this is the way that's straight, but they're all tied up in knots. And they're saying, oh, there are no knots here. Are you crazy? Are you insane? And it's about scribal errors and things of this sort, and whether to trust the older manuscripts over the newer manuscripts or the more number of manuscripts of that type versus the older manuscripts. So it's this kind of thing. And some will say, well, you know, this one has less scribal errors or that one has less scribal errors. We can know for sure that this is the original text of the manuscripts. And they're absolutely insane because none of those ways guarantees any more purity of getting back to the original writing than any other. None of them do. Absolutely none of them do. You say, well, what about taking the oldest, right? Well, you can take the oldest, but you don't know if that oldest one was corrupted just before. And we don't have that manuscript. So we don't know, because if we only have a manuscript from, say, the 5th century, right? I mean, only, that's pretty old. But if we have a manuscript from the 5th century and we look at that and someone says, well, it's 5th century, that's really old, so it must be purer than the one from the 8th century. Not necessarily. The 8th century may have been copied faithfully, more faithfully along the way. And this one in the 5th century may have been completely corrupted in just one generation. I mean, one generation of manuscripts, right? You cannot know from the manuscript how many generations it may have taken before it got some errors crept in or corruption because of someone thinking, well, it can't say that, it must say this. Those things happened. Okay, those things happened. So what I settled on was this, was that the Byzantine form, that form of the manuscripts of the text was most widely spread through the church over the greatest amount of time. And it does have representation that is very old. Very old. So I decided on that for the New Testament. And that's what Robinson and Pierpont were trying to establish from the manuscripts, was what is this broadest, largest spanning manuscript tradition, right? What does it look like as New Testament text? So that's why we're using that. Now, to the Old Testament. Now, that's more interesting because I started with the Masoretic text until I found out I quickly found out, as soon as I started into it, I found out about the problems with that. You've probably heard me talk about it, so I'll keep it down to a very brief summary. The Masoretic text was created by the Masoretes, that was the school of rabbis who crucified Jesus. And they set out to change the Old Testament because the Christians were using the Old Testament to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, they openly say this. They also openly say that they're going to replace the written Old Testament with a new written form that reflects their oral traditions among themselves as rabbis of saying what the text should say or what it really means. And so they're going to replace what's actually written there. And that's what they did. God slowed them down. It took them hundreds of years to complete this project. And it wasn't completed until the 10th century AD. That's 900 years after Christ is our earliest Hebrew Old Testament. No joke. And we can't find earlier ones because the Masoretes, they ordered that those scrolls be collected and destroyed. So that everything after that, after the Masoretic text that's in Hebrew, for the Old Testament there, for that, it had to conform to the Masoretic text that they established and said, this is the text of the Old Testament. They would not allow anyone to look at the older manuscripts that were still showing up and say, oh, well, see, this is different. You changed this, and that's not what's written, because they didn't respect what was written. They clearly didn't. Now, let's go back a little bit further. That was 900 AD, in the 900s. Let's go back a little further, because we have the Septuagint. Now, you might not have ever heard that word before in your life. What that is it's the Greek text of the Old Testament. You might not even know that the Old Testament was in Greek, and that our oldest complete version of the Old Testament is in Greek, by 600 years before the oldest Hebrew version. That's right. And the Jews did it to themselves because they destroyed all of those old scrolls that were in Hebrew in order to put the Masoretic text as the earliest and only form of the Old Testament. They did it to themselves. And God allowed their insanity to lead them down that road, so that now we have for a long time anyway, the oldest Old Testament that exists is Greek. Now, what do we do with that? Well, I looked at that and I said, well, you leave me no choice, Jewish rabbis. I cannot use your text. Your text is purposely corrupted, purposely, by your whole school of rabbis. I dare not touch that script and use it in the testimony of God, because you have no reverence for the testimony of God. I use the Septuagint. So, now, here's the issue with the Septuagint. It was actually translated in 250 BC. That's 250 BC. Wow, do the math. It's over 1,000 years before the Masoretic text. But our earliest copy of it is from the 300s AD. It's still 600 years before the Masoretic text. So I look at this and I say, okay, well, that's what I need to use. Well, the earliest and fullest copy of it that we have is the Codex Vaticanus. Now, don't be afraid because it has the word Vatican in it. The Vatican has this immense library and museum where they have stored things from being destroyed by the pagans and Vandals who sacked Rome. And thank God that these things were preserved. However, they also preserved pagan things. And so that's not so thankful for that. But at least this Codex Vaticanus was preserved. And that's there. Now, here's the issue that I'm dealing with right now, because I've got to establish an Old Testament text that's digital in the Greek, the original Greek. Well, that's not been turned into digital text. It's photographs, plates of photographs of each page. And it's not so easy because there are no spaces between the words. It's just one long word for the entire scroll, the entire book in this case, because they didn't use scrolls for this. It's a codex, that's a book. If you look and you find one of the books, like Daniel, it'll be just one long, uninterrupted line of letters, capital letters, all capital letters, no small letters. Now you'll find some small letters in the Codex Vaticanus in Genesis because the first 48 chapters were destroyed. At some point in history they were destroyed and replaced with someone wrote those 48 chapters of Genesis in small letters, which indicates it was in the Middle Ages. We may know that it's from 1300 or somewhere around there. So I've got to find another source for those first 48 chapters of Genesis because, of course, that's way too late. But these are the issues I'm faced with. So what am I doing? I got my hands on a transcription of the Codex Vaticanus Greek in a digitized format. But I don't know how reliable it is because there are a lot of people out there who are programmers who are extremely sloppy with detail, who are careless and sloppy because of their ego. And that may be why God chose me for this project and raised me up from when I was very young. Maybe because I have no skin in the game. I don't have ego in this game. I know I'm nothing. I know I'm no one. And it doesn't bother me. I'm here to be used by God how He wants to use me. And He has developed me this way from a child for this purpose and other purposes, but for this purpose. So here's what I'm doing is I need to take that text. Now I've broken, it's a verse by verse, one verse per row of data in the database. And I've already created code to break that down into individual words and to store those individual words in its own database. Then I took and created some more code to transform that so that all the letters are in small letters. And they retain their accent marks because in Greek they've got different kinds of diacritical marks that tell you different things that make it a different word. And so that's the second column, which is all small letters. Third column, I then took it and converted it to the letters without the diacritical marks. Now, in the Codex Vaticanus, they have a lot of diacritical marks, but not all of them over the words. And so I need to get rid of that so I can visually compare. But it's all capital letters. So now my last step is to convert the unaccented small letters to unaccented uppercase letters. And then I can take this and print this out into a PDF, for example, and take this and compare the text here visually, because I'm going to take out, of course, the spaces too. When I print it out, I won't have spaces in it. And so then I can go ahead and compare the text letter for letter with the photograph of this page of the Codex Vaticanus with this place where it is in the scripture. It has to be done. Meticulous is going to take a long time, but it has to be done. But the first step is to get the text into that all uppercase unaccented letters, and I don't know if I'll leave the spaces in or not. Probably I will. So I might have two PDFs, one with the spaces, one without, and we'll see how it goes. So that's the first step, is to get a PDF of the text that I can then hold up and visually compare letter per letter to see, is this an accurate transcription of the text of the Codex Vaticanus as it claims to be. It claims to be Brenton's Greek, but I found that his English translation is quite sloppy. Not as bad as the King James, but it approaches it in some places. So I question whether the Greek is accurate. He claims that his source for the Greek was a guy named Valpi's transcription, but I don't know who Valpi is. I can't find out any information on Valpi. I can find out on fields. I can find out the Roman 16 transcription of the Septuagint, the Codex Vaticanus. So I've got those, but in terms of Brenton's source, where he got his Greek, I can't find it. And so I'm not going to waste time with that because it's got to be verified anyway. Even the Roman 16 Septuagint, which is supposed to be a transcription of the Codex Vaticanus, it was commissioned by the Pope, it still has to be verified because these are men. And from what I've seen, a lot of men who are engaged in these kinds of things are sloppy. They're extremely sloppy. Now they don't mean to be sloppy. They just are sloppy for various reasons. For the programmers, those who have programming background, I already told you it's because of the ego and how that enters in. I don't know about the others. It could just be because of a lack of rigorous training and discipline. So that's what I'm facing. That's what I'm struggling with right now to try to finish. I had some problems with it, not rendering the Greek. And so I thought, well, hold on a minute. These other codes that I've created rendered the Greek. So why is it rendering question marks now? It should render the Greek like the others did. So I thought, well, maybe my database is corrupted. So I had to delete that last database where I had all the words broken down. And so now I've recreated that database to make sure it's pure, it's got the same encoding for everything, and that it's got better data types for each field. And now my next step right now is to run this code again that's going to break those verses down into words and put it into this database. But I'm not going to bother with all those columns. I'm just breaking it into the words, and then I'm going to convert that to the all caps with no accents. So, giving you an update. That's what I'm working on in terms of the Bible translation. It's not translation work itself, but it's the preparation of the text in order to verify what the text is, so that my digital form of the text is correct with what's actually physically there in the Codex Vaticanus. So that's one way you can be praying for me, because I lose a lot of time when something doesn't work in the coding. And then I have to go through and troubleshoot it and experiment, try to make it work and give the results I need. And it takes a lot of time. So pray for wisdom in that area, insight, and efficiency, accuracy as well. Although I'm extremely accurate on most things that I do. But you can pray for me on that too, because I need to remain accurate. And, as a human being, various factors can affect it. How well did I sleep last night? How well am I eating right now? How well am I exercising? Do I have the social contact that I need besides the preaching of the gospel? Am I interacting with brothers and sisters on a regular basis to get that social interaction as well? So all of those things are factors that can affect my accuracy, and I'm painfully aware of it. You can be praying for me. May the Lord bless you as you seek Him with all your heart.